Hey class, how have you been? I'm Mr. Lauer, your woodshop teacher, and I'm here today to complain a little bit. We're getting close to Valentine's Day, and it seems like every year, as a shop teacher, I see students waiting until the last minute to make their Valentine's projects. And what that usually means when you procrastinate in woodworking is it limits you in the types of projects and the complexity that you can put into the things you want to make. So usually what I end up seeing as far as last minute projects are things like this. Hastily scroll sawn hearts that are asymmetrical, not enough time for sanding so the edges are all ragged. Occasionally a student will wood burn some message on the other side. Most often it's done in like Sharpie or sometimes even pencil. It's just really poor quality. I know the sentiment is there and it's really the thought that counts, but I'm of the opinion that if you really care about this person, maybe you'd consider putting a little more effort into the stuff you want to give them. So something like this is just not gonna cut it. What we need instead is Intarsia. So what exactly is Intarsia? It's a form of artistic woodworking where you have multiple shapes that come together to form a picture. And usually what you see in this type of segmentation is a bit of rounding or shaping on all sides so that all these pieces come together with a sense of depth. You also get some highlight and shadow as the light plays across the surfaces, and it just comes together in a really compelling, interesting fashion. And you can make any sort of picture with this method. It's kind of a woodwork by numbers. As long as you can print out a pattern, you can make Intarsia out of pretty much anything. To finish it all off, you can use something like a shellac or lacquer, some sort of clear finish to bring out the grain and the color of the wood. So let's go into the shop and you can see how I made this. I started this project by drawing out the shape that I wanted. In this case, it was going to be a heart, so I drew out half of the heart and then copied the other half with some carbon paper so I could get perfect symmetry. Once I'm happy with the design, then it's time to go make some copies. I made several copies of this because I found that it's a lot easier to progress if I have individual copies of each shape. If I was cutting out these shapes directly, I'd be trying to cut on the line once with scissors and then again perfectly with the scroll saw. By doing it this way, then I'm only having to cut that line once with the scroll saw, and that's basically just reducing the chance for error. After I'm done cutting out my sections and selecting my wood, then it's time to use some spray glue and glue my templates onto the wood that I want to use. When my template pieces are glued down, then we go to the scroll saw and cut everything out. When I'm cutting these shapes out on the scroll saw, I really want to make sure that I follow the lines as closely as possible, especially the parts where I know there's going to be a connection between the two different pieces. If I don't follow the lines all that well, then it's going to be a lot more work later trying to sand everything to fit exactly. So the more attention I can pay at this stage, the better off I'm going to be later on. For these pieces, I decided to use a variety of sanding machines. We had a belt sander, disc sander, and a spindle sander. The spindle sander was really important for getting the inside curves of these shapes, but for the outside curves, the belt sander was a much better option. Of course, this is going to depend on the size of project you're making. If you're making a small Intarsia project, like a keychain or an earring, you really don't want to use big machines, even sanders. The little pieces can get flung out of your fingers. For smaller projects, I would recommend something like a rotary tool, like a Dremel. Those can often have little sanding drum attachments that are significantly safer than a larger sanding machine. For smoothing out all the edges, I need to hand sand from roughly 120 all the way up to about 220 or 240 grit. And that's a lot of hand sanding. A lot. After a while, I got tired of hand sanding and, well, once I'm happy with the pieces, then I need to trace out the shape for the plywood backing. I started by putting the pieces together and tracing the outside. And then what I did was reduce that shape by roughly 1/4 inch or so, just by scribing along the inside. And now I'm going to do the thing that I told you not to do, which is cut out a piece of plywood with a scroll saw. And once the plywood backer is cut out, then I simply wood glue everything together. I want to be careful not to let too much wood glue slip through the cracks because that's just going to be more cleanup later. But once I'm happy with it, I put a little bit of weight on top and let that dry. Once your project is all dry and you're happy with it, then you can lightly spray it with a few coats of whatever your favorite clear finish is. I happen to prefer shellac. I like it because it gives a little bit of a warm finish to the project. And any lacquer-based finishes tend to dry very fast and they're also very forgiving. So I like it for Intarsia projects. And that's pretty much it. A project like this is really simple in its execution. You're basically taking a picture, cutting out all the shapes, gluing it to a piece of wood, cutting out the wood, a little bit of sanding, and you glue it all together as one big puzzle picture. And that's pretty much all there is to this project. Now, I only used 2 pieces of hardwood for this, some walnut and maple, but you can see how you could easily expand on this project into a piece of art that is much more complex, and yet the individual pieces follow the same formula of cut, sand, and fit together. And folks, in terms of time spent, this really is a procrastinator special. I spent maybe an hour and a half making this project, which is practically no time at all. And compared to something like this, I think we can all agree that this is far more impressive as a Valentine's gift. So that is the basics of Intarsia. I hope you enjoyed the video and that you got something of value out of this. I'll see you in the next one. Class dismissed.